You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Now, we are more than a month into the season, both the regular season for the Mets as well as the minor league season, which is the perfect time to take some stock in prospects. Today, I'm going to break down the top 5 prospects whose stock has risen the most since the start of this season. And we're going to open it up with a guy that just made his first start in AAA on Friday night, and that is Nolan McLean. He is really good, and I didn't think that this would happen. Not only has he clearly passed Jonah Tong as the clear-cut, no doubt about it, number 2 pitching prospect in this system, he might have a case to be made to be the best pitching prospect in this system. And I don't take that lightly because Brandon Sproat is a really good pitching prospect. Last year, Brandon Sproat was the better of these two arms. He was more polished as a guy that had been pitching a little bit longer. Nolan McLean was a two-way guy in college, continued to be a two-way guy last year. So I think that focus on pitching, wasn't obviously all there. He had a lot on his plate. And now I think you're seeing why you don't have too many two-way players in baseball, because there is something to be said about being able to focus on your craft, whether that's hitting or pitching. And for McLean now, he knows his pathway to the big leagues is clearly as a starting pitcher, or as a pitcher in general, I should say. He did have a lot of reliever risk because this is a guy that spins the ball really well, that you could see just, fastball sweeper as a reliever and be up and be a high leverage arm, honestly, pretty soon. But now what you're watching instead is a guy that, yes, has the fastball. Yes, he has a sweeper, but he also has a good cutter, a really good feel to pitch. He could be a frontline starting pitcher, and he might be better than Brandon Sproat. They're both at the same level again. Now, Sproat has, gone through a lot of struggles this year in AAA, a level that a lot of Mets pitching prospects have struggled at. If Sproat started the year in Binghamton like McLean, his numbers might be similar, but he hasn't. So he's got the ERA, I think it's at like somewhere in the 4.5 range so far this season. For Sproat, McLean has a 1.08 ERA because he had another brilliant start, but this one was in AAA. 7 scoreless, and it was really 7-7-7. 7 innings pitched, 7 hits allowed, all singles, 7 strikeouts. Nearly made it a really weird day if it was 77 pitches, ended up being 78. But think about that. 78 pitches to get through 7 innings. And it's not like he was just keeping the ball on the ground the whole start and that was it. Although there was a lot of that, he still found his way to 7 strikeouts. So to get 7 strikeouts, to pick up 21 outs, and to do all of that on 78 pitches, that's outstanding. Nolan McLean could be right now the top prospect in the Mets system. I don't know if anything is decided yet. I want to see what McLean does with a couple of starts in AAA, not just one, because it could have just been a bad day for the opposing lineup. So I want to see how going through tougher lineups in AAA is going to impact McLean. But right now, this guy has been lights out to start this season, and there's no place for a McLean or a Sproat in the picture for the Mets rotation this year, just because they have 5 guys throwing the ball well. They have Paul Blackburn on the mend. He could be back in a week or two. And then you still have Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas. So there's just so many options in this rotation that it's hard to envision where there will be a crack for these pitching prospects. But at the same time, the more they continue to throw the ball well, the more you get to that point where you might force the Mets' hands. Sproat hasn't been there yet. McLean was able to force their hands to promote him up to AAA. What happens if he does this 5 more times? What happens if he is in AAA absolutely carving? Do the Mets have to make room for him? How do they? It's a tough problem to have if you get there, but for now, the Mets have 2 very intriguing pitching prospects in AAA, really 3 if you throw Blade Tidwell in that mix as well. I just think Tidwell is kind of a tier below those guys right now, but Sproat and McLean are guys that you can dream on, where next year they should both be factoring into your rotation mix. Christian Scott should be healthy off the Tommy John surgery. So if you want to talk about homegrown pitching, the Mets could have a lot of it rising to the surface next year. But Nolan McLean right now is a guy that already had some very high stock in this farm system. He was clearly a top 10 prospect in the system going into the year. Probably for most, the top 5 prospect. Now he's no doubt top 5. And I'd say he's top 3. I think if you're looking at this Mets system right now, there's 3 prospects that really stand out. And that is Brandon Sproat, Nolan McLean, and Jet Williams. And I'd even throw maybe Carson Bench in there as well, because he's a guy that the Mets just drafted in the first round who, everyone was really raving about that pick, and he's gotten off to a good start in Brooklyn. But I'm not going to mention Carson Bench today other than that, as well as Jet Williams, because these are guys that I think their stock has stayed the same. Someone like McLean has seen his stock rise. Another guy who has seen his stock go up is Jack Wenniger. Now, granted, he has gone through a little bit of a rough patch here his last 2 starts. He gave up 6 runs in 4 2/3 innings and then followed it up with allowing 4 runs in 6 innings in his last start. Still got 6 innings, though, which is pretty solid. You look at what he did, though, to really put his name on the map in Binghamton to start the season. 4 starts, 5 innings each time, 2 earned runs allowed overall. So he was pitching to a sub-1 ERA through 4 starts. He had better numbers than Nolan McLean did through 4 starts this season. 3.52 ERA overall now, 37 strikeouts and 30 2/3 innings pitched. Last year, he started in Port St. Lucie, ended in Brooklyn. I thought he might go right back to Brooklyn, start this season. I thought it was a little bit of an aggressive promotion to start him out in Double-A, but clearly it was not, and he has been able to hold his own. I think the Mets might keep him in Double-A all season just because you have to spread out your arms, and that AAA rotation is pretty loaded. But Jack Wenniger can get, challenged, I think, all year in Double-A, and it'll be good for his development. I think this is a good spot for him. But I think coming into the year, you were talking about a guy that was, maybe somewhere between, depending on the outlet, like 15 to 25 maybe in the Mets system, like somewhere in that range, like not even really getting close to being a top 10 prospect. Now, as you reevaluate things, I think he's somewhere in the top 15 and one of those guys that can be making that push up and up the rankings if he can get back to what he did in the first 4 starts. Maybe not a 0.9 ERA across his next 4 starts, but keeping the other team off the board a little bit more than the last 2 starts where he's given up 10 runs overall. But Jack Wenniger, his stock is definitely up. There's no doubt about that. Another pitcher who we've seen the stock rise on, I've talked about him a bunch lately because I think he might factor into the big league conversation soon, is Felipe De La Cruz. This is a guy that's been a starting pitcher throughout his minor league career, but the Mets have just made the decision that he's going to be a reliever moving forward. He did make 1 start when he got promoted up to Syracuse, and it was brilliant. I didn't pull those stats for today's show, but off the top of my head, I think it was like 7 innings pitched on 70 pitches, and it was just 2 hits allowed, something crazy like that. Really dominant performance, but they've now started shortening him up. His last appearance was out of the bullpen. And I think that's where they're going to keep him because he really is a guy that has 2 pitches. A fastball that out of the bullpen, he could probably keep, in the upper 90s, a touch 98 out of the bullpen in his last appearance. I think he can maintain that velocity in shorter spurts. He's got a good slider. And so that is the makings of a really good left-handed reliever who could help the Mets this season. He's got a 1.27 ERA on the year with a 0.75 whip. That is outstanding. Whip is walks and hits over innings pitched. If you are at less than 1 on your whip, you are really doing something right. 0.75 is a really good whip to start the year. 31 strikeouts and 21 1/3 innings pitched. I would not be surprised at all if Felipe De La Cruz was in the Mets bullpen at some point this season. But even if not, it does seem like the Mets have a left-handed arm that could be a real difference maker in that bullpen in the not too distant future, even if it does end up being in 2026. Really exciting arm the Mets have now. Switching over to the position player side of things, I got 2 more guys to round out our top 5 prospects whose stock is on the rise. We'll begin with Jacob Reimer, who very well could be right there with Nolan McLean. He might be the guy that's seen his stock rise the most this year. He's been amazing in Brooklyn, and this is coming off a lost year due to injury. Last year, What was the injury? I'm drawing a blank here. I can't remember if it was a hamstring. I think it was a lower leg injury. I'm almost certain. Regardless, though, he shot through the system in his first year back in 2023, had a lot of success in Port St. Lucie. And if I'm not mistaken, he did get out to Brooklyn, and he got on base but didn't really hit. Last year, didn't perform very well, goes to the Arizona Fall League, doesn't really perform well there either. And so it was a real question, what's he going to be this year? And I also remember some ugly at-bats in the spring breakout where I was really starting to wonder, okay, what's Jacob Reimer going to be? Has a prospect like Jesus Baez passed him as the top third base prospect in this system? I said that then, and I was wrong. Jacob Reimer, once again, is looking like the top third base prospect in this system. He's hitting .330 to start the season, .416 on base, .615 slug, 5 home runs, 24 RBIs, 24 runs scored. He's leading Brooklyn in runs scored, RBIs, home runs, doubles, and triples, as well as if you look at the OPS as well. There's a couple guys with a shorter sample size that are right there or better with batting average and on base. But for guys that are playing consistently, he's pretty much leading the slash line as well across the board. Jacob Reimer is still only 21 years old. Okay, this guy was drafted in the 4th round out of high school in 2022. So still a young prospect. I believe he'll be 21 all season long. So there is a lot of time for development here with Jacob Reimer. He might end up in Double-A at some point coming up here. I don't know how long they're going to keep him in Brooklyn where he's just absolutely dominating. Maybe they want to see this continue for a little while longer. But Jacob Reimer is definitely moving through this system now, or moving up this system when it comes to rankings. This is a guy that by the end of the year might be a consensus top 10 prospect in the system. So a great start to the season for him. And his new team has had a really good start to the season as well. A.J. Ewing started the year in St. Lucie and was unbelievable. Hit .400, .506 on base, .614 slug, 20 RBIs in 18 games, a 1.121 OPS. They promoted him out to Brooklyn. In 9 games played, he's hitting .316 with a .381 on base and a .526 slug. .907 OPS will play. He's got a lot of speed. He was an infielder. Now he's getting time in the outfield, and that might be his long-term home. Could be a center fielder. Might be the center fielder of the future for the New York Mets. He's another guy that can factor into that conversation. And it was a big day on Friday night for the Brooklyn lineup. Ewing had a triple early in the game, and then his next at-bat, he homered, and it was part of back-to-back-to-back homers. He was the middle homer sandwiched in there. Eli Serrano hit the first homer. Then it was A.J. Ewing. Then it was Carson Bench. Those 3 guys atop this Brooklyn lineup have all been outstanding this season. That is a really good lineup. Got a lot of stats pulled on that lineup that we're going to do on a future show at some point. I guess I might have to update them because I was going to do a segment on it the other day, but ended up doing a lot of talk about Pete Crow Armstrong on Friday's show instead. Regardless, though, this Brooklyn lineup is loaded right now, and 2 guys with their stock on the rise the most right now in this system are right atop this lineup with Jacob Reimer and A.J. Ewing. Really exciting to see where the season goes for these guys because they just could not have gotten off to a better start. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Assuming we have some time on tomorrow's show, I'll do the other end or the other side of this coin tomorrow. Talk about 5 prospects whose stock is down the most to open this season in the Mets system. So make sure you don't miss that. Follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Really do appreciate all of the support. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the only show that'll take you around Major League Baseball with insight from all 30 local experts for each of your teams. That's Locked On MLB Game Night, where we go around and break down all the MLB action each day throughout the season. You find Locked On MLB Game Night streaming, or not streaming, but on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel, as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.